Welcome to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where Peter Madison and David Shurock discuss the complexities of adopting new ways of working at scale. Hello, Dave. How are you doing?
Peter, isn't it great to catch up? We've both of us taken a bit of time off, so good to catch up, full of energy, lots of ideas fizzing away in your brain for us to discuss.
Of course, of course. I've just spent the entire vacation basically just reading things. Of course, that's what I do.
Just for the podcast.
Just for the podcast. Just yes.
Okay, hit me. What is it? What is the topic for today?
Well, one of the articles I was reading about, and in the general concept was this idea of one pizza teams, and it's building on the old Jeff Bezos Amazon two pizza teams, 5 to 8 people. This idea that's should be the right size of a team so that you get optimized for communication between the individuals on the team and the amount of productivity and cross-domain knowledge you would need within the team to effectively deliver something of value. So that conceptual idea in the age of AI has been boiled down to the one pizza team, so we can effectively do more with fewer people.
Now that is, you say in the age of AI. So what you're saying is, hold on, we don't need as many people on the team because many of the things that those people were doing can now be automated, can now have an AI agent helping us out, whether it's writing test automation, configuration, whatever it might be, patching, things like that.
Yep, writing documentation, updating, writing product requirements,
Yeah.
writing release notes. All of these things can be subsequently automated by our friendly neighborhood AI agent.
This I find an interesting one. I think, especially the way you're describing it, because I've launched a lot of, let's call them two pizza teams, but agile teams. I've helped a lot of organizations get those off the ground. And that list of stuff that you described that the AI agents are going to take over are often very definitely secondary responsibilities, or at least they get less attention than they should do, even on a two pizza team. Whether it's documentation, I'm not a fan of overdoing documentation. However, I also rarely see teams that document really enough to create a maintainable, sustainable application. As an example,
Eh,
test automation again. I rarely see, I mean, yes, I've seen some really stupendous teams which have absolutely are in the zone on that, but it's not as often as we think.
I would 100% agree with you. I mean, what I've definitely seen, especially in larger organizations, is that you're going to have a small handful of teams, especially if they're working closer to the edge and to the customer, who are going to have a better handle on how to do things like build test automation frameworks that work for their rapidly changing environment. And those people are they're more the exception than the norm.
Yeah.
Especially people who are looking after large legacy systems, they're not going to have that. And one of the pieces that I'm observing there too is exactly what you're describing, is that the AI functions are really helping increase the capacity of the team. Is giving them access to a additional set of capacity that they wouldn't have had access to before, that can go and do these things that they were never going to get to anyway.
I'm not sure that's even increasing capacity. I think what if I think of what we want our teams to do so that they're building sustainable, a code base, a feature set, which is a sustainable feature set over, a few years, we need them to have the discipline to do some of this housekeeping hygiene work.
Yeah.
And so if we take the view that the AI agents are really providing the housekeeping hygiene type of work, then you don't want to reduce the size of the team. It just means that what that team is delivering has that hygiene and the disciplined kind of documentation, test automation, other bits and pieces. It's maintained at a higher level. So now I've got better quality code that I can work with more quickly, and et cetera, is available, is usable by my customers, maintainable, and so on, which doesn't drive you to necessarily reduce the size of the team. It just means that what they're delivering is a higher, more sustainable caliber of work.
Yeah. So when I talk about capacity, I'm talking about there's an ephemeral capacity. So if I had 8 people, I still have 8 people. It's just as
Yeah.
if I had another 4 people who are now doing all of this other stuff that I would have loved to have done a better job of, but I never had time to do before.
Yeah, so I think that the 8 people are still busy.
Hmm.
And the volume of work the team is delivering actually is about the same because those features are, there's that work that wasn't done, the technical debt buildup that we kind of are trying to avoid, but always, we go into those cycles of, okay, let's turn and clean up and come back. Well, that goes away. So over time, they're going to gain capacity because they can move quicker, because they're not having to go and deal with emerging technical debt issues that kind of flip over into really affecting the production environment in some ways, so they get more time to deal with to actually expand and deliver more features, but over time, not from a sprint by sprint basis.
Yeah. So it's increasing their capacity to deliver,
Yeah.
right? So they've got more capacity to deliver. They can deliver more.
We'll eventually have. I think that
Yes.
one is a slow burn in some ways because I've seen so many teams keep pushing that like a bulldozer, just pushing that work down the road. And so,
But now you see it happening because I've seen a lot of teams now where they weren't able to get to the
yeah,
test automation. They weren't able to get to that level of detail and documentation, or they weren't able to get to properly written out user stories because it would just take too long. And so you end up with these, instead of
yeah,
one sentence user stories, you end up with more description
properly written
and
ones.
properly
Yeah.
written ones, which
Yeah.
can then become better discussion points between the product owners and the teams around, okay, so what exactly is it we're trying to do here? What is it
Now,
we're trying to build?
if that was happening, would you not think that overall your experience using digital tools, any sort of technology apps, whatever it is that you're using, should be getting better and better?
I think that
Should
it's
be
going to
less
take,
less swearing at the screen as something doesn't behave the way you thought it was going to, or it crashes, or whatever is happening, or the outages and so on. Do you really see that happening?
not yet.
Okay, so we're talking futuristic at the moment or hypothetical.
I think a lot of those pieces, and as you were saying, that like part of the reason that you do that documentation is not necessarily for you, it's for who's going to come after you to be able to
Yeah.
understand what this does. And being able to dynamically maintain and update and look up that type of capability we didn't really have before. That was a very difficult thing to do. It was a very
There
heavy
were
manual.
some places have it
Yeah.
definitely, and it depends on the environment you work in and what sort of industry and so on.
Yeah. Low
However,
context, high
it's rare.
context, a lot
Yeah.
of
I also feel that this comes back to is what we're describing certainly what I think both of us experience when we go and work with various industries, but is that a cultural thing? Is it really because I feel if it's a cultural thing about, whether how much documentation, how much of the hygiene work, the disciplined work has to be there versus is not, it means that we're going to rush to one pizza teams, this idea of smaller teams, just so that, and we're really still going to have that gap.
I think it's, as with everything, very, very complex. and the more complex the organization and the more things that
Yeah.
an organization is doing across the number of different systems that it's doing, the harder it is to maintain the discipline across all of that complexity. And it becomes a
Well,
big ball of mud where you're going to have some areas which excel and some that don't.
yeah. But this
And
is what AI should really help you out with. I mean, AI
yes.
generically, but if I'm able to apply that like routinely across all of those different modular development
Mhm.
capabilities that you have across the organization, I mean, of course, it's going to get quite difficult. You'll have legacy systems that are being maintained, which really aren't suited to that sort of AI-driven hygienic work.
There's this piece of, so to your earlier point that we should see things getting better over time as a consequence of this. There's an underlying assumption that if you have good hygiene, well-defined requirements, you will deliver the right things in the right way, that you're going to have better test frameworks, that you're going to have
Yeah.
a better quality overall of the end product as a consequence of this, and that will lead to better outcomes,
Yeah.
which I
Now,
hope is true. Because otherwise, I feel like I've probably been
well,
wasting my time.
I think, I mean, we certainly both of us believe that is the right way to go forward, but that doesn't mean organizations buy into it. They have pressures. As you said, it's a complex environment. They have different pressures leading to where they spend time and energy,
And we,
what they
you and
value.
I, I'm sure, still see a lot of the common problems around where should we be focusing, what should we be doing, what should we be building, and these AI tools are not necessarily doing a good job of helping in that space. We still see a lot of organizations who struggle to figure out what should I be prioritizing next, what is the next part of the system I should be evolving,
Yeah,
and where is my next customer coming from? It's the
yeah,
that side of things is still a challenge, I would say, and where we're seeing or at least where I'm seeing the biggest adoption of the sort of the AI capabilities, and this is widely spoken about in the press, is within technology and solving technology problems, not in the sort of the business space as much.
yeah.
It's not solving a business problem.
Well, yeah, and that it doesn't get the attention across the organization if that's the case, for sure. What I did want to sort of turn the conversation around a little bit because I think we've taken the idea of a two pizza team shrinking down to a one pizza team, and I think there's an I would describe certainly my perspective on that one as I'm cautious around it because I think we're not necessarily getting what we think we're getting when we do that. But there's a concept or an area where single pizza teams, and I'd say half a pizza or a quarter of a pizza teams really make sense, which is the startup world.
Yes.
I would argue, I think there's again with the sort of tools which are out there around rapid coding
Mm-hmm.
systems, you do not need like to grow your development capability as quickly or at anything like the scale that you would have done a few years ago when you have an idea, you get an app to the market, you're beginning to gain traction. And we certainly see it. We work with a number of companies and kind of help them get their feet and get off the ground. And they're in a situation where it's an individual contributor, basically one individual who's running nearly everything in the company, apart from, maybe you start looking at partnerships or sales or some sort of pipeline growth. But so much of the get the idea out into the market, get it tested, validate, build it out, put the first run of customers on it. All of those things can be done with very, very small teams, like individuals, multiple, two or three people, maybe at most.
Yes, and it certainly can. And there's an awful lot that you can do there, especially once you have an audience. And that this still comes back to one of those pieces that all of these wonderful, magical pieces where you see somebody market something and get it out to tens of thousands of people. And when you look under the covers, you find that a lot of the time it's because they already had an email list that they could do that with, and that they already had some avid followers who they could knew were going to buy whatever it is they put out there. And so you can start a product very, very quickly when you already have that, because it gives you a test bed. So I think it's almost like you got to build that out first. But I completely agree that all of the tooling is there to help get that much, much faster than it ever was before.
Yeah. And with not just faster, but with fewer people resources, on the
Yes.
ground. So you're not needing, I mean, in many cases, as a product took shape, as an audience was beginning to be identified, the next priority would be you need a team. And you can outsource it for a bit, but at some point you're going to need to have a team working on that. Well, that need for a team is now need for one or two individuals
Yes. You can
because
do much more with far fewer people.
exactly.
One of the interesting pieces from that is the adage around the number of communication channels that get created. When we talk about this from a project management people, part of the reason for the whole two
Yeah.
pizza team was that smaller groups means there's fewer number of people to talk to each other. As you go above sort of 8 to 9, that you're drastically increasing the number of communication channels that need to be there to keep everybody on the same page. So if I have a smaller team, who can't I now get more done, and there's fewer people that need to communicate?
Yeah, that's Metcalfe's law, right? So the number of communication interactions. Now, there's an assumption there, or at least there's an open question, which is if I have an AI agent, is that a line of communication?
It's well, when if we're looking at an agentic AI system where the agents are feeding into other agents, and they then the communication channel there isn't to a human.
Well, that there you're looking down, along the pipeline, if you like. But there's a difference between an automated service that is just doing what it's doing versus an agent that is interacting with, I guess, either other agents or with other, with developers to figure out what's going. And I would argue that that is a communication. I'm really interested. I've not really seen that and kind of figured that out, but I
Yeah,
think that does count in your communication channel. So just because I'm a two-person or a three-person team, if I have a couple of agents, isn't it like having a five-person, 4 or 5 person team?
I think it depends if you're able to have those agents take care
Yeah,
of dependencies between themselves. Then, uh,
I was going to say
and
we are consultants at heart, so of
yeah,
course it depends and it's
yeah.
complex.
And I'm being somewhat
I,
flippant here too, because there,
yeah,
and intentionally, there's one of the big concepts here is like how much autonomy do we want to actually allow the agents to have, and that's largely going to depend upon the sensitivity of the data that those agents are dealing with. We may want to enforce that there's a human in the loop to ensure that things aren't going wrong, and when we want to do that probably depends upon the criticality of the system and the interactions that are being dealt with, and most likely the data that's being processed through that. So, like for example, if I'm setting up a marketing chain of things, I probably don't care because most of the
yeah,
data isn't going to
yeah,
necessarily be PII, or it's not going to be
yeah.
internal data that I'm feeding into that. Maybe depending on what exactly you're doing in marketing. So the that means that I can maybe allow that to run with a bit more autonomy than I would have done otherwise. However, I might want to be very, very conscious of, is that going to impact my brand? Is that going to impact how people others see me?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we need to see more examples of it, but certainly some from personal experience is any interaction with an agent or with sort of tools that are supposed to help me out, I find the overhead of communication of at least learning how to communicate in a way that makes sense is not insubstantial. Let's say it's at least like having a new team member and having to figure out how they understand what we want of them, and they need to understand what to ask of us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think in a generic sense, if we're interacting with them in that type of fashion, then yes, I would agree. If they're very targeted at a particular workflow, and
Yeah,
effectively it's a tool as a part of the system or function that that area is
yeah,
performing, then it becomes a
yeah.
bit different, I think, in that respect.
I think our first conversation coming back, we've hit quite a few things, and we're nearly, it's been an interesting conversation. How do you begin wrapping this one up? So there's a few key takeaways.
So I think for me, some of the key takeaways would be around the yes, you can get a lot more done with a fewer number of people. However, you may still need a larger team to deal with a lot of the complexity of the underlying systems. Like I wouldn't immediately go out and say, okay, I'm going to take all of my two pizza teams and break them into one pizza teams. And you suddenly, I think you'd struggle to do that at scale, just due to the level of maturity and understanding of the underlying
Yeah.
systems that they would have to deal with, especially in a large organization due to the complexity. However, there's an awful lot of value to all of your existing teams in increasing their capacity to deal with a lot of the busy work, which should ultimately result in a higher quality, more supportable system over time. And I'm certainly seeing some amazing uses of the technology
Yeah.
to tackle problems that probably never would have been tackled before. But arguably, if we know, since we know how productivity is calculated, we're not necessarily increasing productivity by doing it. We're increasing the ephemeral capacity we have in the organization, and we're dealing with problems that are good to deal with.
Yeah.
So that it's an interesting conundrum, I think. So I think that would be one of my
Yeah.
biggest takeaways from it. Uh, and my other takeaway is I would agree with you that in the startup world, I think is a very different story. That if you're greenfielding something into a new environment, and so that would apply in a large organization if they're greenfielding something too, that you
Yeah.
can do an awful lot more with far fewer people than you ever could before. What would you add?
I think as you were describing that, the thing that I would add is let's put it in a slightly different way. The question, should you be chasing one pizza teams? Ooh, it's a bit difficult to say. There's a lot of dependencies and so on. Should you be experimenting with it, identifying greenfield development where you can just put one or two people on it and say, run with it? Should you be trying it in certain areas where you do have clarity about what support, you're already seeing benefits of using some of the AI tools out there to kind of provide the hygiene and the discipline of certain things the developers are doing, go chase those down, right? And chase them hard because you can guarantee other organizations are already doing that. There's a lot to be said for where you can go in those areas in that sort of technology space. I find it I think the experimental find the you mentioned earlier on about business benefit and the business being involved solving business problems. I think in many cases we're seeing a lot of press right now about how many AI initiatives have either been considered to have failed or just haven't delivered on their promise. And I think the general consensus from what I've been reading around, and certainly our experience, I think for both of us, is if you're not tackling a real business problem, then go find a real business problem to tackle because that's where you're going to see the biggest return. You're going to get the most take up. You're going to get the most support. And so sometimes it's taken more as it would be nice to try this rather than let's go find a business problem that we can really, use some of these ideas with.
And yes, exactly. And I think some of that is going to require rethinking the way that certain processes are done. And that is a very
Sure.
hard thing to do. Awesome.
Excellent. Good to catch up
Indeed.
again, as always. So thanks again for the chat.
Likewise. And I look forward to the next one.
Until next time.
You've been listening to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where your hosts, Peter Madison and David Sharrock, focus on the art and science of digital, agile, and DevOps at scale.